Can everybody hear me okay?
Yeah.
All right. Well, I'd like to thank everybody for being here. I wasn't exactly sure what to expect, honestly, but the city pastor has been very gracious in letting me do this. So I would like to thank the forum and specifically Becky Vanover. She kind of made all this happen. Then for all the family and friends and people that's here, and God, of course, too. I don't know if everybody here knows me or not. So I live here basically my whole life. Well, not necessarily in Hazard, but around Hazard, right? I live in Viper. And I thought about the reason I was doing this, and well, it seems like everybody has problems. I mean, there is no life that is not problematic, right? But everybody doesn't have somebody to talk to about those problems. And so I thought that maybe having a community event like this would be beneficial, right? And so I like to talk, and my problem is not talking but shutting up. So you may have to run me out of here. But so that's why I'm here. I went to Moorhead a long time ago and got my degree in psychology with a focus on cognitive neuroscience. And then I graduated from Lindsey Wilson, my master's in counseling. Now I'm going to Galen for nursing because, I wanted to be a doctor at one point, and I didn't go to med school. Because it revolves largely around what I'm going to talk about tonight, honestly. I wasn't willing to put forth the effort, and I wasn't willing enough to be responsible. And it took being irresponsible to notice that. So that's one of the reasons I didn't go. But so I guess I want to follow up with that with nursing school, because I don't know, I've always had this fascination with health, which, by the way, is why I went into psychology to begin with. Because I think if you ask anybody who is a mental health professional or does research in psychology, one of the things that they're going to talk about is, well, wanting to know more about themselves. And I really can't understand how anyone doesn't want to know more about themselves, because that's one of the fundamental things that gets us through life, right? It's like we can't not know about ourselves and expect to function properly, or at least optimally. So, well, and another reason I decided to do this is just, like I talk in session all the time about people facing their fears, right? Because one of the things that you have to do in order to overcome anxiety, well, because realizing you're anxious or you're in pain, emotionally or physically, is not, well, it's rather obvious. There's not a lot of guesswork. It's like, well, I'm having a bad day, or I've had a bad week, or a bad month, or a bad decade. There is no guesswork to that, right? It's like rather obvious. Well, one of the things that we do as therapists is we discover all the facets that make that a reality. It's like, well, why are you anxious? What is it that's going on in life that makes you be anxious or depressed? And so we delve into that and figure out ways to get out of that. Well, so it's another reason I want to do this, because it's like, I don't want, my life is not perfect either, right? And so, well, in order to not be completely hypocritical of everything that I talk about on a daily basis, what can I do to avoid even more hypocrisy? So it's like, well, I want to get on stage and talk about it, because that's necessary, right? And maybe in the process, I will be able to help someone. And, well, that's also very necessary. Because it's inherently meaningful to have conversations. It's inherently meaningful to have discourse that is deeper than a hubcap, right? It's like it's important to have conversations so that you can learn about yourself and others. And sometimes willing participants are not, well, they're not in abundance, let's say. So, and one final thing. It's like, I've been doing the therapy thing for a while. And one of the things that I've discovered is that people is not necessarily aware of their own potential. You know, it's like, well, I'm not aware of that I don't know if I'm capable of getting beyond these problems. Whatever the problem may be. It's not blatantly obvious to me that I can do that. And so, well, I mean, that's a fundamental problem within itself. So what does that do? That makes all the problems that we have exponentially bigger. Because, well, it's like one thing to be stuck, but then it's another thing to be stuck and think that you're going to be there the rest of your life, right? And that pattern is going to annihilate any good things that could ever come forth. So, it's one of the things that I guess I wanted to talk a lot about tonight specifically. Because, well, I think that people have potential. And I have to genuinely believe that from not only on a personal level, but also a professional level. You know, if I didn't, then everything would be completely in vain. And I would be of no benefit to anyone. In fact, no one would ever be of benefit to anyone else. It's like you couldn't be of benefit to your spouse, you couldn't benefit your kids. You can't if you can't benefit yourself. And if you think that you're stuck and there's absolutely no hope, well, then you can't benefit yourself. And that's not acceptable. So that's one thing that I want to talk about. This isn't, by the way, this isn't going to be a therapy session. Okay? I don't know exactly what anybody's preconceived notions of this complete thing was, but another thing that I talk about a lot in session is what's called psychoeducation. And the idea is, it's like, okay, so let me explain to you a little bit about the way the mind and the brain works. Because that's important. It's like, you know, I can't drive to, I don't know, let's say Texas without a map, you know. Well, psychoeducation kind of is a provisional map, right? So it's like, okay, so here's a picture, and within this picture might be some explanation of the patterns of behaviors or thoughts that are being problematic. Because, well, this is the way psychology kind of works. You know, it provides a framework for how we dissolve the dilemmas, right? So it's important. It's very important. I mean, otherwise we don't have a frame of reference, right? So has anyone ever seen this book, by the way? Okay, so, well, maybe a few of you. This is the DSM. Okay, it's the Diagnostic Statistical Manual of Mental Disorders. And it's kind of a problem, honestly. And here's why. It's people, well, I guess ever since the internet has came out, and then also all these antidepressant commercials, it's like everybody has begun to diagnose themselves. Or at least look into WebMD or something like that, because it's like, well, okay, I know that I've got some kind of something going on that maybe I can't rationalize through, or that makes me different than my neighbors, or I'm really, really sad, so obviously I need antidepressants, and so on and so forth. So you either get on the internet and you look up what depression is, or anxiety, or mood disorder, or whatever it may be. And, well, that's not good. And let me explain kind of the way this works. Okay, so let's say that the curtain here is like a line. Okay, so the column here, and this column here, is a parameter. Okay, so all right, so anything to the right of this column and anything to the left of this column may be worthy of, let's say, a diagnosis. But here's the thing. The entire thing, this entire spectrum, is where most people are most of the time. So what I'm saying is, it's like, and you may have heard this, it's like, well, anybody who reads the DSM or gets on WebMD or whatever the case may be can find something wrong with them or can find a diagnosis. But everything is completely a spectrum as far as depression and anxiety and hopelessness and worry and confusion ambivalence, and all these different things, these psychological metrics that we kind of subscribe to or want to fit inside of. It's like, well, you're going to find them if you look hard enough. Diagnosing yourself is easy, but when you do, you're going to end up with 20 of them because it's that easy. But they're going to be inaccurate. So, yeah, it's not a good idea, guys, to think that just because you maybe fall under some criteria in a book, that all of a sudden you have this pathology, which by that I mean like a disease, like something that is not, let's say, healthy. Because, well, anxiety and depression and hard times, well, not only is it inevitable and it's a part of life, but it also doesn't mean that you can't function. And that's really another thing that I really want to talk about today is the ability to function. Because look, I mean, well, I don't want to get ahead of myself. So I've made this PowerPoint, by the way, because I have the tendency to jump around a lot. And I'm trying my best to stay ordered. We'll see if this does any good or not. Okay, so when I went to the city council, they asked me what I wanted to name this event. And I give it a little bit of thought. And so I don't even know if anyone really knows what that's here, knows what the title is. But the title is Pain, Purpose, and the Pursuit of Betterment. So I want to break each one of those down and go through each part of the title systematically. Okay, like, so what is pain? How is it recognized? What does it absolutely and necessarily do to us? Not only mentally, but let's say physiologically also, because that's important, right? Okay, so then what is purpose? How important is purpose to us? Because that seems to be fundamentally important, right? Because if we don't have purpose, then, well, it's like, why do we want out of the hole that we're in anyway? So, well, and if we can find a purpose, it seems to stand to reason that we're also going to be on the way of the pursuit of betterment. So I think everybody wants an idea of betterment, whether that be, I don't know, especially psychological, but physically also, or financially, or whatever the problem is, because there's no shortage of problems in life, right? It's like, man, there's what I'm saying is there's plenty of reasons to feel bad. Right? Financially, in regards to relationships especially, because then there's just a litany of problems that come with that, right? You know, children, loved ones, loss, work. So the likelihood of us not being anxious at some point in life is zero. So, all right. Well, so let's start with some psych stuff. There's some fundamental presuppositions of psychology, and what I mean by that, there are certain things that are understood to exist, irrespective if we understand them properly or not. But they're rather obvious if we give any kind of consideration to them at all. Okay, and there's three of them that I really want to touch on tonight because, man, they're really, really important. And they're important to the point that they cover a lot of area. They really do. Okay, so like one of them, for example, is, well, we don't want to die, right? So the idea is self-preservation. And you see this in all kinds of psychological models. I mean, if you've studied psychology, maybe you haven't, but if you have, you know, maybe you're familiar with like Maslow or Murray or some of those guys. But so one of the things is self-preservation. That's really important to us. Now, some of it may be lost if we're deep down, and we have that hopelessness and that anxiety and that sadness and that really deep stuff that, man, it just prevents us from caring. But it's still there. So that's one thing. The other thing is the need to belong. So it's like, well, we need to belong in groups. How important is that? How important is it to have camaraderie? How important is it to have someone help you, someone love you, someone care for you, someone to be with you should you need someone to be with? I mean, it's really important stuff. We can't just deny that those things exist, right? So that's two. The third thing that I want to talk about specifically is control. That's another thing that everyone, irrespective of age, race, color, religion, it doesn't matter, is control, right? Because we want to think that we are masters of our cognitive and emotional domain, right? So we want to control things in the world. As we move through the world, we want an element of control. And the reason that we get anxious or sad is because that sense of control is lost, right? So what do? Hopefully, we try to figure out the best way, the most maximal, responsible way to reobtain that, right? So those are three things that we're going to be talking about, and they will tie in to other areas that will be brought up. Okay, so self-preservation, the need to belong, and control. And by the way, there's another thing that I will. It's not really an idea in psychology. It's actually brought up in philosophy. It's a branch of utilitarianism, and the idea is to maximize pleasure and minimize pain. So let me kind of make that really obvious. It's like we want to be in good stuff. We want to experience pleasure as much as humanly possible, and simultaneously we want to be away from pain, right? And that makes a lot of sense. That's rather obvious, right? But I don't like that. I don't like that because, well, again, I'm going to try to avoid getting ahead of myself. People often do not understand exactly what can be derived from pain. It's like, okay, so I want to go through life and everything be unicorns and rainbows and sunflowers until the day I die. Well, first of all, that's not going to happen. And secondly, I don't know that it would be good for you if it did. Well, that is obvious, right? It's like, well, of course it'd be good for me. It's better to go through life happy than not happy. And it's blatantly obvious. Shut up, you're an idiot. You don't know what you're talking about. Happiness is always superior. Well, maybe, but not totally. And, well, there's a reason. I'll go ahead and talk about that. There's a reason for that. Let's go back to the curtain again. Well, we're going to cut this. See, there's a top part up here, and then there's this big old long part. If you can figure that out, right? If you can see that distinction. Psychologically, we have positive emotions and negative emotions. Well, that's rather obvious too, right? Well, let's say that the top part of this curtain represents our positive emotions, and the bottom part represents our negative emotions. And if you haven't realized it already, I chose something that is very deep on purpose in correlation to something that is relatively shallow. Because as it turns out, like, we have a really shallow portion of positivity, psychologically. So let me make that a little bit more obvious. You can only be so happy. Think about that. You can only be so happy. And likely the duration of your happiness is not going to be that long. But when it comes to sadness, despair, hopelessness, all of those negative emotions, fear, anxiety, doubt, confusion, man, there's depth there. There's depth. I mean, it's not even comparable to the positive side. There's physiological reasons for this, but okay, so here's something I want you to think about as I continue this, right? Because yes, there's a lot of depth in negative emotions. How do you think we grow? Keep that stored somewhere. Because it's not with happiness. It's not with happiness. Okay. another thing I want to touch on before I go on, and because I want to keep kind of talking about, well, education and kind of the way the mind works. Okay, so we have positive and negative emotions. One of the things I teach almost every single client that I have that comes and sees me, I want to return to the idea about control. There's three fundamental aspects. Now, these aren't let's say the presuppositions of psychology that I laid out earlier. Excuse me, these are different. This all revolves around control. So, we have thought, right? Cognition. We think. Okay, well, another aspect of our totality, let's say, the whole psychological thing is not only how we think, but then we feel also, right? We have emotions. Well, lastly, we have behavior. And so I usually draw this triangle out because I keep a board in my office, markers, and I draw this triangle out and I put a T or a C up here, right? And then an E down here for emotions and a B over here for behavior, so that I can have a visual representation of what I'm talking about. And I asked my client, because think about it, control is very important, right? Now, just to remind you, we're anxious when we don't have control. So I asked my client, how much control do you have over your thoughts? And 9 times out of 10, they're like, well, a lot. Okay. What about your emotions? How much control do you have over your emotions? Most of the time they will say, well, actually I have a lot. And then I'll ask them the same thing about their behavior, to which they get the same response. And then I bring up a scenario. I'm like, okay, well, let's say you're standing there in line at Walmart, and you're just waiting to, I don't know, get your groceries and maybe some milk and bread, right? And for no reason, someone just comes up and kicks you in the shin. How much control do you have over your thoughts? If someone kicks you, let's walk through this triangle again. And usually they're like, what? So here's the idea, because research suggests that we don't really have any control over our thoughts at all, nor our emotions. Now this is important, just stick with me. So, because when we're kicked, we think like, oh man, we assess it, right? We're like, I've been kicked. Why is this person blah, 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 right? And maybe some expletives just thrown in there. And then we get emotional. We get angry or sad or whatever the case may be, but it's usually some kind of negative emotion would be linked to be getting kicked. And so we kind of freak out a little bit. But then, both of those things are automated, essentially, right? It's like very reactionary, which, by the way, almost all thought is reactionary. Okay. But then you also have a choice. It's like, okay, someone just kicked me. Someone just treated me improperly. Am I going to backhand them? Am I going to ask them why they've done it? Am I going to give them some groceries out of my buggy? Well, you have an infinite possibility of things by which you can react to that stimuli, irrespective if it's bad or negative stimuli. You have a choice through behavior. Because even if you think, like, man, I would love to just kick them back, right? You don't have to. You don't have to. So the only thing that necessarily matters is your behavior in response to stimuli. Okay, so now, why is that important? Well, as it turns out, choice is actually related to control, right? So if we go through life and all we want is control in order to not be anxious or sad or depressed or hopeless or aimless, whatever the case may be, which, by the way, is why we're down here anyway, is because we're lacking control. So it's like, okay, I want control. What do? We think about the thoughts and emotions for the next 6 months that we can't control. Now, why is that? Think about that. It's like, okay, I'm going to put all of my focus and attention while looking for control on an aspect of myself that I can't control and expect a change. How much sense does that? Well, I mean, it's not obvious to us, but that's why I'm telling you, so then now it will be. Because it's like, well, I don't want to ruminate on this terrible relationship. I don't want to ruminate on the fact that my boss sucks. I don't want to ruminate on the fact that whatever the case may be, I don't want to think about it. What do? You think about it for the next 6 months. Well, how do you behave in response to that thought, to that emotion? That's the important part, because that's the only thing that you can control. And there's power with that, right? Because we have a responsibility to ourselves to behave in a manner that is most responsible. Getting ahead of myself again. Well, as it turns out, there is a positive correlation. If you don't know what that means, can't really make a graph. As responsibility goes up, so does happiness go up. Now, there's a caveat to that, because as it turns out, if someone has too much responsibility, it looks exactly like having no responsibility. And this has been documented in research. It's like people need to find a medium of being responsible. You need to be maximally responsible without falling off the emotional cliff. But we'll get there. We'll get there. One of the things that people talk about a lot, and this is a weird thing. I want to make you think outside the box for a second. It's like we live in Eastern Kentucky, and it's no secret that there's a big population that uses substances, okay, to various degrees. But the idea of being addicted to something. Now, for those that aren't addicted, it's like, well, why would you ever want to do that? Why would you ever do your body that way? Why would you ever do your mind that way? Why would you ever lose yourself to that? Well, I want to make you think of something. When is the last time that you were wrong on purpose? Because I want you to think about it. It's not the case that we can necessarily be wrong on purpose, because everything we do is justified. We're essentially, the reason I'm saying this, we're essentially addicted to ourselves, right? When has it ever been the case that it's like, it doesn't matter to what extent that it may be, or how completely insane or what kind of asinine thought you would have that would be, I don't know, a good idea. It's like, it's still justified. It's like, I say this sometimes too, because I like to draw huge, well, I want to add a certain amount of, an obvious nature to my clients. It's like, nobody necessarily thinks throwing babies off bridges is a good idea, right? So, but, okay, well, let's pretend that I'm on the side of the bridge here, and I'm just chucking babies off the bridge. Well, likely everybody would say, you're an idiot. Why are you, that's a terrible idea. No one is going to agree with that it's a good idea to launch babies off bridges. Maybe I also know it's a bad idea. I'm not refuting it. I'm not refuting saying that, well, I know this is moral of me, but while I'm just throwing babies off the bridge. What I am doing is justifying the fact that I'm throwing babies off the bridge, irrespective if it aligns with my moral nature. And there's importance to that, okay? Because I justify everything that I do, just like everyone justifies everything that they do. It's like, well, okay, so someone wants to take a pill. Somebody wants to drink 14 fifths of liquor next weekend. Somebody wants to do whatever the case may be, and it's easy to point fingers and be like, look, man, bad decision making. Maybe it is. But it's no different than any justification you do throughout the day. Right? Because you're never wrong on purpose. Keep that in mind, because we're going to come back to that. Why do you think I thought a lot about change. You know, why is it that change is so difficult? Okay, so let's go back to being addicted to ourselves. Let's say that you're in the position and you don't consider the fact that you're addicted to yourself, but you know that you're in a bad place. Okay? Maybe to the point to where you're willing to ask someone for help. Okay, so come to a therapist. One thing that therapists like to see is change. Right? I mean, to some degree. To whatever level that the client is willing to go. Right? Because if they're not willing to change, then, well, why are they there? Because you can only motivate someone so much. They have to be self-motivated to some degree. Now, we can proactively motivate, but so here's the idea though. And therapists know this. Change is inherently difficult. Okay, so let's talk about why. It's like I'm anxious and I'm depressed and I want things to get better, but I'm not willing to do any kind of change in my life for things to get better. I just want them to magically get better. Okay, now that's why I'm saying that. Because it's easy to think like that. Because we don't want to change. We're inherently against the idea of changing. You know, that could be for any number of reasons. It could be spiritually, it could be psychologically, it could be physically. We just, we shun it. We shun change. Well, there's a reason for that. Remember when I was talking a few minutes ago about, like I gave three different, like, presuppositions of psychology. And one of those things was, well, that was like control, and then need to belong, and then self-preservation. Okay, well, think about self-preservation for a second. If I care about myself so much that I don't want to die, which hopefully you do, if I change, I may die. There's no guarantee that by taking this chance that I won't die. Right? By the way, death is considered, well, the idea of death, let's say, is considered negative. So it's a really deep idea. We don't want to just walk into something that may potentially harm us, so we're very reluctant to do that, despite all evidence suggesting that we should. Right? Okay, so we don't necessarily, everybody's asked someone for advice, likely. It's like, okay, so I want to ask someone for some advice. Maybe it's in regards to a relationship, because that seems typical. Okay, so you go to a friend and you're like, hey, excuse me, should I leave? Should I go? Right? They're like, man, you need to bounce. That's bad. You need to bounce. No, I'm going to stay. When do we listen to them? We always ask for advice, but we never listen. Because we've already had this idea that the only reason we ask is we want validation. That's it. We don't want to change. We want validated. Okay, so change is necessarily hard. So, well, that's important. Because if you're going through, let's say, a negative psychological phenomenon for a long period of time, the idea is change is probably a good idea. So what are we willing to do in order to do that? Okay. I don't think I need to necessarily define pain for anyone, but I will briefly touch on it. It's like, well, pain can be acute or chronic, meaning that it can be kind of spontaneous and short-lived, or it can be this really, really deep, long, drawn-out process, let's say that developed in childhood, right? Because trauma, as it turns out, can do a lot of things to the brain. I'll touch on that a little bit later, but so pain can look very different to different people, and people has different ways of dealing with it on various levels, right? So, I mean, I think everyone kind of understands what pain is. One thing about it psychologically, though, is it kind of tends to, let's see if this sounds familiar, it tends to resemble like a tornado. It's like, okay, so you can imagine like this tornado on stage, right? And all the good, you're in the middle of the tornado. You're just in the middle of it. And all the good things that have value or meaning in life get thrown out. Fair enough. Well, physics is a funny thing because one of the things about a vortex is it also sucks things in. So what does it do? It pulls all the pain, misery, death, and hell straight down on top of you. Okay, so now you're left there without any value, any meaning, any hope, and you live with well, misery, hopelessness, death, and hell, basically, right? And that's not a good way to sustain yourself. So, and it looks like that. I mean, that's kind of a generic analogy, but it seems to mimic both. Well, we're here talking about anxiety and depression specifically. And so I assume anyone here probably has an idea of what those things are, but anxiety and depression, although that they look different as far as like the nervous system's involved, they still, man, there's a lot of fear and anxiety and, let's say, pain. I want to keep it generic because I think there's importance to that. Because, well, pain doesn't have to be pathological to be existent, for one thing. All right, so that's pain. The second part of this title was purpose. So, what is purpose exactly? Right? And it's weird because people don't necessarily associate, they don't think about purpose being something that is therapeutic. Right? So they think that when people imagine therapy, they think that the therapist is going to be smoking a pipe and they're going to lay on a couch and get analyzed for the next 17 years and talk about their childhood. Right? So, I mean, it's essentially the idea that people have in their head when they think of therapy. It's not necessarily like that. Kierkegaard, he was a philosopher. And well, there's a relationship between psychology and philosophy, if you don't know. But he said something that I think is really important in regards to what I'm talking about tonight. He said in his book, Fear and Trembling, life is not a mystery to be solved, but an experience to be had. I think that's what he said. Life is not an obstacle. That's what it is. Life is not an obstacle to be solved, but a mystery to be experienced. That's what it was. I'm sorry. Okay, so what does he mean by that? He knew that, just like everyone here, that problems necessarily exist. If we work under the assumption that every single problem can be solved, well, then we're wrong. We're inherently, absolutely and necessarily wrong, because, look, they can't. Life is not one of these things where it's like, well, 1 plus 1 is 2. I mean, it's not necessarily like that. Okay, so it's like, but if I assume that, let's say there's an imaginary thing here, like a wall, okay? If I make the assumption that, okay, so I'm going through life, and here's the problems that I must face. I can't. What is the likelihood